good evening, everyone. My name is Charlene Margot, and I am founder of the Parent Education Series, now in its 18th year, brought to you by nonprofit The Parent Venture. We are delighted to have with us tonight Linda Flanagan, author of the new book, Take Back the Game: How Money and Mania Are Ruining Kids' Sports and Why It Matters. This is a wonderful book, not just for people like me who love sports, but everybody who has a child who's involved in sports. So again, we're just so happy to have you all with us tonight. Take it away, Linda.
Okay, well, thank you so much, Charlene. And it's a pleasure and an honor to talk to all of you tonight about youth sports and what we can do to mend them. You should know that where I live in Summit, New Jersey, isn't greatly dissimilar from where you all are in Northern California. There are some differences, but though you're much larger and more innovative, my community is also competitive, status conscious, and fixated on the academic and athletic achievement of our children. But I really want to start by telling you a story. A few years ago, I met a young woman named Isabel. She was in college at the time, an excellent, prestigious name university, I should add, and we sat down together to talk at a nearby cafe. Isabel has long brown hair and sparkling, intelligent eyes, and she looks the part of an upper middle class young woman. We'd gotten together to talk about her experience as a star lacrosse player in New Jersey. She began practicing as a 6-year-old and joined a competitive club team in 4th grade. She played with that club team all the way through high school. Isabel was remarkably talented and soon became a local celebrity. Young kids asked for her autograph. College coaches started pursuing her when she was 14, a freshman, the same year she gave up basketball and soccer. She loved her lacrosse teammates, and when she was out there on the field, she felt, in her words, extraordinary and unique. Isabel was recruited shortly after finishing 9th grade, back when such methods were allowed. The summer before her junior year, Isabel was at a club tournament in Boston when she jumped up for a ball and landed awkwardly on her foot. She felt something pull in her knee. She torn her ACL. Here's how Isabel described 11th grade. "It was my worst year ever," she said. "I felt I was falling behind my teammates and friends in lacrosse. Also, I was out of the social mix. I had to go to PT after school for hours while my friends were all hanging out together. Your whole world revolves around it. So when you don't have it, you're like, what am I going to do? I had no other hobby," she said. During her 8 months of rehab, Isabel felt restless and developed an eating disorder. Her anxiety was off the charts. By the spring, she was able to play for the team, but did so with a limp from her knee injury. She threw herself back into lacrosse as a senior and helped her team win the Tournament of Champions, the pinnacle of success for a high school in New Jersey. She did this despite having a stress fracture in her hip. She got through the games with assistance from a PT who used Bengay, dry needles, ice bags, and everything under the sun, as she put it, to get her through the game. She was on crutches all summer before going to college. College lacrosse was not what she'd expected. Everyone on the team was a high school superstar like her. Despite working harder than she ever had before, Isabel got almost no playing time, and her eating disorder resumed. She was worried and depressed. As she put it to me, quote, "There were probably 20 to 30 times this last year when I started to cry after practice. I was so frustrated with myself and the whole new environment." About playing in college, she said, "No one warned you about the mental side of it. To go to the bottom of the ranks of the school and adjust to the team. No one ever talks about that." Isabel graduated 3 years ago. Though she stuck with the team, she didn't start a single game and had scant time on the field. Her mental health was still a struggle. So with that as a backdrop, let's talk about how youth sports have changed. When I was growing up, I didn't play sports the way kids do now. My athletics were generally local and low-key. I played on a town softball league and later my high school tennis and softball teams. I took up running on my own time and developed into a decent runner. Ages ago, I was a 2:49 marathoner. Today, kids' sports are different. I assume that most of you know this and are here because you dwell in this universe. But on the off chance you don't, let me just tell you briefly. Youth sports have moved from child-centric, recreational, and local to adult-driven, highly organized, and focused on building sport-specific skills. Club and travel teams have supplanted neighborhood sports. The latter still exist in some areas, but middle and upper income families know that the real action is on the club teams. Whether children participate in sports is largely a function of family income and parents' education. The wealthier the family and the more advanced the parents' education level, the more likely their kids are to play sports. The converse is also true. So what does this mean? It means that in low-income communities, opportunities to play have diminished. Funding for parks has been on decline since the 1970s. In 2013, parks and recreation represented 1.9% of all local government expenditures, a 21% drop from 2009. A third of the lowest income high schools offer no sports teams at all. In these areas, there's a sports famine. Thus, where sports are most needed, they're most lacking. Predictably, obesity rates are highest in low-income areas, and the problem got worse during the pandemic. By contrast, in middle and upper income areas like ours, there's feasting on youth sports. Here, where private clubs and leagues have swooped in to replace their community teams, there's competitive pressure on children to pick one sport and specialize in it at younger and younger ages. In my community, for example, the area soccer club offers a junior pre-academy program for U4s. That would be 3-year-olds. Private clubs often require children to play this one sport year-round. As sports specialization has picked up, the multi-sport player has become a bit of a relic. And there are consequences to all this feasting. First, young kids who might not be so fast or coordinated as some of their peers drop out before they've even been through puberty. They figure they won't make a school team, so what's the point? The average kid spends less than 3 years playing sports and retires by 11. That's a terribly large number of kids who've given up on sports and who won't accrue the benefits that come with exercise. Among the select who do devote themselves to year-round play, and according to the Washington Post, about 30% of kids playing sports specialize. There's been a surge in preventable injuries. This year, the Aspen Institute reported that 44% of kids between the ages of 5 and 18 who played sports suffered from an injury. Half of these are the result of overuse, often a function of too much training and too little rest. Pediatric sports doctor Heather Burgesson called overuse injuries an epidemic. Orthopedic surgeon Charles Popkin used the same word to describe the elbow injuries among the young he sees that require Tommy John surgery. Not that long ago, this procedure was unheard of for kids. Neeru Jayanthi, who had sports medicine research at Emory University, said that we've advanced injury types by 4 years. In other words, the types of injuries he used to see in 20-year-olds are now common in 16-year-olds. What he used to see in 16-year-olds, he now sees in 12-year-olds. There are other injuries, some with long-term impacts. There's CTE, or chronic traumatic encephalopathy, which results in part from cumulative hits to the head. In youth tackle football, the CDC reported, kids hit their heads almost 400 times a season. The Aspen Institute's recent survey on injuries found that 8.4% of kids who played sports last year got a concussion. There are eating disorders too, some that last a lifetime, which are more common in athletes of both sexes than they are in non-athletes. ACL tears too have skyrocketed. 1 in 20 kids who played sports last year tore a knee ligament. Half of those tears will likely morph into arthritis within 10 years. That means 50% of those 7th grade girls who tear their ACLs in the middle school playing fields will be hobbling in their early 20s. I spoke to the team doctor for the Chicago Bulls, Jeremy Allen, who also works with kids, and he lamented that catastrophic knee injuries like these among kids have been normalized. All of this reminded me of a young woman I interviewed named Callie, who was in her late 20s and in medical school when we spoke. Callie had played lacrosse very seriously for her club in high school, as well as 2 years at a competitive college. She'd been a star. Today, she can't walk upstairs without limping, despite the 5 surgeries she's had to repair her torn ACL. When we spoke, she described how the pain in her knee had prompted the latest surgery. It felt like I was having scalding hot water dripping from my knees to my toes, she said. It might surprise you to know that Callie's post-athletic life is not that unusual. According to one study that compared life outcomes of Division I athletes with their less active peers, the former collegiate players were more limited in their activities and had more major and chronic injuries than their classmates who hadn't played varsity sports. The Division I athletes also experienced greater worry, depression, sleep trouble, and social dissatisfaction. And there are psychological costs to this feasting. One sports psychologist told me that he and his colleagues concur that depression and anxiety among high school athletes has increased during the last 10 to 15 years. The National Athletic Trainers Association put out a consensus statement in 2015 with this warning: many high school athletes have been identified as having higher incidence rates for sleep disturbances, loss of appetite, mood disturbances, short tempers, decreased interest in training and competition, decreased self-confidence, and inability to concentrate. I doubt the situation has improved since they released this statement. College athletes, too, are struggling. In the 2019 goals survey that the NCAA conducts every few years, involving some 20,000 athletes across the divisions, 30% of the girls and 25% of the boys said that difficulties were piling up and there were too many to conquer. And there are effects on the family. A sweeping meta-analysis of the research found that competitive youth sports affect parents' employment patterns, the quality of their partnerships, the amount of family time, and sibling relationships, among many other things. One weary woman with 2 kids playing intense club soccer and lacrosse explained how exhausting it all was. There are days I can't handle it, she told me. She had to shift from part-time to full-time work because the kids' schedules were too demanding. She and her husband spent every summer weekend apart, each driving one child or the other to tournaments. Most people wouldn't know I was married, she told me. When I asked one psychologist how youth sports had gotten so distorted, he said simply, when we took them too seriously. Dr. Victor Schwartz, who heads the JED Foundation, said this: kids have come to feel that the stakes are higher and higher and that there's less room for mistakes. There's also wisdom from psychologist Lonnie Sarnell. High-stakes sports take something that's a stress outlet and turns it into something that's a source of stress and anxiety. So how did we get here? In my research, I've identified 3 broad reasons to explain the transformation, and I won't belabor this because we have a lot to talk about. The first is that youth sports have become a big business. According to Wintergreen Research, which is considered an authority on the subject, the industry in 2019 was worth roughly $19 billion. Since I wrote the book, they've updated that number to $28 billion. Research conducted by the Aspen Institute found that parents spend between $30 and $40 billion per year on their kids' sports. The industry includes equipment manufacturers, sports media companies, sports tourism, new technologies, and more. Though the shift away from cheap public sports options began decades ago, it took off after the financial crisis in 2008. Private industry filled the gap. The second reason has to do with parents. We have different perspectives on children, what we owe them, and what they can do for us. Children have moved, in the words of author Jennifer Senior, from our employees to our bosses. Journalists and academics have been trying to figure out how and why this happened, and they agree on a few things. The first is that economic anxiety has made parents more worried about their kids' prospects. This anxiety has prompted us to engage in what sociologist Annette Leroux calls concerted cultivation, a vigorous and relentless effort to nurture our kids' talents so they don't fall behind. The second factor is children's relative scarcity. In 1976, 40% of mothers had 4 or more children. Flash forward to 2014, and the 4-child family has been replaced by the 2-child family. This scarcity has made children more precious. Another factor that has led to the shift is how we view children is our exaggerated fear of stranger danger. We all know that they need to be watched 24/7, so nothing dreadful happens. Finally, an invisible intellectual canopy hangs over all of us and provides a rationale for this behavior. It's an offshoot of what intellectuals call neoliberalism, the belief that the individual is solely responsible for her success or failure, that society is a fiction, and that government is the problem. A corollary of this belief holds that parents are solely responsible for controlling and socializing their children, and that child development is shaped by parenting strategies. If kids' achievements are the result of mom's and dad's effort, then surely the parents deserve some credit when the child is a basketball or tennis champ. Sports sociologist Jay Coakley put it like this: you're a good parent if you spend $10,000 a year on your kids' soccer. The third major cause of the changes in youth sports has to do with higher education. We all know the cost is prohibitive. The annual cost of a four-year private college is $44,000, which is often, for many families, exceeds the cost of their mortgage. The perception that colleges are tougher to get into adds to the angst. It feels like it's impossible for average and even all the above average kids who live in our towns to be admitted anywhere. The higher hurdles to admission at top colleges makes getting into them that much more prestigious and desirable. At the same time, we've come to believe that where a child goes to college will determine her career, her friendships, her romantic pursuits, in short, her whole life. Where kids go to college seems much weightier than ever before. The reality of the costs and the conviction that where kids go to school is critically important have prompted some families to turn to sports as a way in. And if they didn't know before the varsity blues scandal broke, they surely know now that recruited athletes are awarded advantages in admissions. They're generally held to a lower academic standard, have a streamlined admissions process, and in some divisions are eligible for athletic scholarships that in 2019 totaled $3.6 billion. Altogether, these three big movements, the money, the stakes for parents, and the shifts at colleges, have altered the way we provide sports to kids and the way they experience them. So why does it matter? It's just sports, right? Well, one thing I've observed in my interviews and podcasts since my book came out is that no one wants to talk about why exercise and team sports are important. They just want to talk about the problems, which, I understand. I'm a journalist. We have a negativity bias. But I think we ought to resist it. As a former coach and dedicated runner, I can tell you that I'm not here to say we should abolish organized sports and do away with gym class. On the contrary, we need to restore and improve them because exercise and movement are critical for a healthy life. If you read the science section of the New York Times on Tuesday, you're apt to come across yet another finding about the wonders of exercise. But let me share with you some of the good news about sports. Just 150 minutes of walking per week or 15 minutes of daily jogging improves cardiac health, reduces growth of the body mass index, improves memory and cognitive processing, and might delay the onset of Alzheimer's disease. Young people who play sports in high school are more likely to graduate, go to college, and avoid drug use. Girls who play sports are less apt to get pregnant and are more likely to run for political office or occupy corporate suites. Sports are especially protective for children from troubled homes. A study of 10,000 young people who had experienced severe trauma growing up found that kids who played sports in high school had better self-esteem and sounder mental health later in life than their peers who hadn't played on a team. The researchers concluded that playing for a team connected those kids to their school and was a protective factor in their long-term health. Moderate exercise thwarts depression and relieves anxiety. A new study just published in JAMA Pediatrics showed once again that exercise interventions were successful in treating depressed teenagers. Multi-sport play is tied to better long-term performance, an increase in lifetime enjoyment of physical activity, and more recreational sports participation. And time on the playing field is time away from social media and a reprieve from what NYU professor Jonathan Haidt calls kids' phone-based childhoods. We're beginning to figure out that the mental health crisis among young people is not strictly a matter of Gen Zers speaking more openly about their troubles. More and more evidence points to the ubiquity of cell phones, and social media use among kids as a major cause of their distress. And when young people are playing sports, they're not on their phones. Finally, local athletics have the potential to build larger connections in a community. I'm sure it's not news to you that we're living in divided times. According to the Surgeon General, we're also experiencing a crisis of loneliness, many of us bowling alone or retreating to our couches at night to watch The Golden Bachelor or Mad Men reruns. Youth sports played locally are an antidote to this isolation. Community teams introduce children to kids from other neighborhoods, smoothing the transition to middle school. For adults with a well-developed prefrontal cortex, kids' games can be a kind of forced, alcohol-free social hour spent with parents of different backgrounds and experience. Sports can be powerful connectors in ways rarely found elsewhere. I'm sure many of you who played sports growing up and who are working in the field today have your own reasons for wanting to preserve what makes athletics valuable. So what can we parents do? I would love to think that there would be some top-down action, but I think I wouldn't hold my breath waiting for anything to happen that way. So what are we going to do about it? Well, you would think this would be easy, but nearly all the parents I've spoken to feel powerless about the incessant running around and driving to tournaments. One mother told me, it felt like you didn't have a choice. Another woman with 3 teenage daughters who said that club sports have gotten crazier and more intense with each successive year, and who admitted that she and her husband had not been away together in more than 10 years to accommodate those sports, told me that they couldn't see a way out. Once they'd gotten on that train, there was no exit. If there's one essential point I'd like you to take home with you tonight, it's this: you have agency. Despite the expectation that, of course, your 7-year-old is going to play travel soccer, organized sports are not compulsory. Learning how to serve a volleyball is not the equivalent of learning how to read. You can reclaim your authority as parents and do what's right for your children and your family. And if you're sticking with a club team for whatever reason, remember, you are paying for the services that coaches and leagues are providing. You're the customer. Own it. With that in mind, there are 5 principles and 2 challenges that I'd like you to consider when thinking about how to manage your kids' athletics. I can't promise that following these will put all the fun back in the game, but they'll go some way towards restoring sanity to your household and giving your children a fighting chance of enjoying themselves on the field. Principle number 1, ask your child what she wants. What do I mean by that? Follow their lead. If your child is going to have fun with sports, maybe even play into adulthood, encouraging them to plot their own course is the first essential step. Every organization devoted to improving youth sports starts with this rule. It's okay to nudge them towards activities, but if you do, offer a variety of sports options and let them decide. And remember that unstructured play is probably the most beneficial exercise of all. Principle number 2, protect your family and your child. I've told you already about how competitive sports disrupt families. To keep the intrusions at bay, start organized sports later. Stay local. It's better for families and communities to keep sports close by. Talk to your local Y or recreation center about expanding and improving what they have to offer. If you go down the club route, put boundaries around play. Object every now and then. Say, no thanks, we're going to skip the extra strength training sessions. Sorry, can't make the 3-day soccer tournament over Mother's Day. With school teams, suggest doing 1 team dinner per season, not 12. Try it. The world will continue to spin. Work with parents to impose reasonable limits on the number of team practices and games. Join the board of sports organizations to establish healthy norms. If that fails, go to a different club. And keep in mind these general principles about appropriate training levels to minimize injury. These come from Dr. Neeru Jayanthi, who I mentioned earlier, who's the authority on this. Kids should not train more hours per week than the number of years they are old. That means an 8-year-old shouldn't train for more than 8 hours a week. Don't have your child play up a level. Allow no more than one sport per season. And encourage free play. The ratio of organized training to free play should not exceed 2 to 1. By the way, this is one reason why girls get hurt more than boys. They engage in less free play. One more way to protect your child. If the coach is a tyrant or a bully, remove your child from the team. Abusive coaching behavior is more common among elite child athletes than their less intense peers, because parents tend to look the other way when the team is winning and their child is playing. It can seem too risky to make a stink. Don't mistake a coach's record or his reputation for getting kids recruited with excellence. Make sure your kids are coached by decent humans. Principle number 3, strive to keep perspective. This is one of the greatest challenges as a parent. It was Kierkegaard who said, life can only be understood backwards, but it must be lived forwards. It's terribly hard to keep youth sports in perspective, especially when, as one friend put it to me, your whole community is conspiring to make them seem more important than they are. As someone who occasionally lost perspective herself, I can relate to this problem. So how do we keep it? First, figure out if you've lost your way. How long after meeting someone do you let it slip that your child's a point guard or a miler? If it's less than 5 minutes, you might have lost perspective. How would you react if the tiny tennis player in the family wanted to quit? If you're devastated, you're overinvested. Then talk to older parents who've been through this and who know better. They'll help you understand that what seems of earth-shattering significance today will be a faint memory in a year and forgotten in 5. Practice distancing techniques. Imagine how you would advise a friend or observe yourself as if you were a fly on the wall. And when your child is struggling and all you want to do is scream at the coach, remember these 3 things, something I picked up from a coach named Greg Berg. First, accept the struggle. That's what sports are about. Second, it's your child's struggle, not yours. And third, the struggle is not the enemy. To borrow from Leonard Cohen, there's a crack in everything. It's how the light gets in. Principle number 4, model what you want them to learn. It seems trite to say it, but just offering up please and thank you to your kids' coaches goes a long way. This is not only a gift to coaches, but also a lesson in manners to your kids. Obviously, you all know this. But still, many parents think nothing of telling their kids to say thank you at the end of practice while openly trashing those coaches once everyone is back in the car. It must be terribly confusing. The same goes for screaming at refs and umps. There's a shortage of youth sports officials in the United States. We've lost 50,000 or 20% since 2018. And part of that has to do with obnoxious fans. Miss some games, parents. This is a very controversial recommendation I've made. Miss some games, and this serves two purposes. First, it's a reminder to you that your life shouldn't revolve around your kids' sports, because the sport is theirs, not yours. But also, skipping the occasional game reminds your child that he's playing for himself and not for you. If you're always in the stand, your child must be unclear about who he's playing for. And reclaim your own life. What we parents signal when we're constantly driving our kids around, cheering their efforts and sacrificing our own well-being, is that adulthood is a big bore. We want our kids to look forward to growing up and becoming independent. We want them to move out of their childhood bedroom before they're 40. We need to be modeling a rich and full adult life that, of course, includes helping our children grow into responsible adults, but that also allows for our own flourishing. And the last principle is get back to basics. Ask yourself often these vital questions and be honest. What are we doing this for? Who are we doing this for? Is the sport achieving that purpose? Is this activity serving my child's long-term interests? If your honest answers suggest that you're off course, that your family's being driven mad by the demands of sports, that your child is already sick of it, that you're really only taking your kid to tryouts because everyone else is, and what do you know? Take a breath. Listen to your gut. Then fortify your backbone and change direction. And if you think you have to do this anyway because of college, take comfort in these facts, store them away. 6 to 7% of high school athletes play in college. 2% of high school athletes get any athletic scholarship money at all. Only 15% of D1 athletes get full rides, mostly in football and basketball. And about 2% of college athletes make it to the pros. Okay, I'm done with my 5 principles. Now I have 2 challenges for you. The first challenge, which is closely related to modeling a happy adulthood. I invite you to reconsider the assumption that running yourself ragged for your children's sports makes you a good parent. In my community, prattling on about how frantic you are with all the distant competitions and relentless practices has become a not so subtle, humble brag. I challenge you to rethink that. I also invite you to interrogate the idea that more is better. More practice, more training, more gear, more tournaments, more money thrown at it. Incidentally, a study done by the Families in Sport Lab found that the more parents spend on their kids' sports, the less the kids enjoy them and the more pressure they feel. The more is better mindset is a peculiar American fixation, and with children and sports, it's wrong. Children need balance in their lives. They need rest, they need time in nature, they need sleep, and they need freedom from constant pressure to perform. If it weren't a contradiction in terms, I would call for a revolution on behalf of moderation. Okay, so I started this talk with Isabel's story because on the surface, her experience represents exactly what many parents hope for when championing their kids' sports. Isabel had enormous natural talent and enviable drive. Everyone looked up to her. Remember, 8 and 9-year-olds had asked for her autograph. She was recruited to a top college at 14. But the reality of Isabel's athletic experience wasn't so dazzling. All that lacrosse stunted her interests, mangled her body, and messed with her emotions. I want to close this talk with the words of Isabel's mother. I spoke to her about her daughter's sports career and asked what she'd concluded from the whole thing. She said, "We got caught up in it. She went to running coaches and trainers. Why did I buy into that? Why did I do it? But I was the first one to do it. I'd say, go out and run. I want to strangle myself when I think about it now. When you're in it, you don't feel that way. It takes on a life of its own. It's insane. You don't know it until you're through it." I'm hoping that my talk tonight helps you and your family avoid these regrets and inspires you to embrace the wisdom of her experience. And now I will turn it over to Charlene.
Wow, thank you so much, Linda. You're
My
giving
pleasure.
flashbacks to my entire life in sports with my and myself, having been married to a pro athlete for 25 years.
Wow. Very
So,
good.
so my first question to you is, other than I want to start by saying thank you, because I know people who are with us today, you probably have kids in sports. It's not an easy thing to turn the lens, right? And look from things from a different perspective. But I think you've done that really fairly tonight, Linda. It's really important. But my first question to you is, why did you feel that you needed to write this book at this time?
Well, this book was many years in the making. I mentioned in the book that I've been an athlete my whole life, and I guess it really came to the fore when I started coaching, which was 1,000 years ago, when my youngest was in kindergarten. And it was really then when I could see how it had changed so much. Like I had gone into coaching because I thought, I wanted to help another generation of kids learn to love the sport. I always tell them I wanted them to get the running bug, and that's why I did it. And it was fun and I loved it. And I think teenagers are great. And that what I quickly discovered was that there were other priorities going on. Like the whole issue of what sports could do for you had been kind of brushed aside. And it was more about, well, what can this sport do for her college prospects? And that was a while ago. And I coached up until 2019, and that persisted or got worse over the course of those 17 years. So that's kind of what prompted it. I've been thinking about it a long time. It's been bothering me a long time because I love sports. They're a big part of my life. My husband's an athlete. I was always grappled with this contradiction that, well, sports are great. I want kids to play. I want my kids to play. But at the same time, why is it's so out of proportion? It's just wildly out of proportion. And so that's how I got into it and started, researching and stuff.
Okay. So I want to read a quote from your book because I thought this was just beautiful. Linda, you say, "We can't return to the past, nor should we aim to, but we can try a little harder to preserve what matters most about kids' sports, the way they compel self-knowledge and discipline, the way they bolster friendships among all types and tribes, and the way they bolster habits of health and well-being." If we could make those things true again, we would, right?
Right. Well, because that's truly what sports are for. That yes, some, fingernail of kids will advance to, varsity sports, then college, and then pros. There are some kids who will, but for the overwhelming majority of young people, their sports career, certainly for team sports, will likely end in high school if they make it to high school. So, let's try to get what's great about sports when they're young and not distort them by going way too, overboard, which doesn't help anybody. It's not helping the kids. It's not helping families. It's not helping those who it ought to be. It ostensibly is for.
And so you talked about, again, the numbers about college athletes and those that go on and actually play, either in college or professionally. They're so small. Mm-hmm. My brother had a daughter who was talented in golf. She was adopted late. He was 56 when she came into the family. And I said to him, there's no way she's going to get to Cal Poly, San Luis Obispo. No way she's going to get a scholarship. She did. Mm-hmm. But I watched that kind of unfold over the years. And then, college ends and it's like, it's done.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So how do you really think sports should play in college admission? We see in Silicon Valley, many parents who seem to think that sports is the golden ticket to get their kid into college.
Well, I think that has contributed greatly to the warping of sports. If I could do it all over, I would say, separate college sports from college, like just do club and intramural. I realize that's never going to happen. But if you're using sports as the entire purpose is this, in order to get them into college, then you've just undermined the very nature of sports, what they're supposed to be for. It will work for some people. We saw that, the case against Harvard that was adjudicated and the results of which came out in the summer, those findings about the Harvard's admissions process, their athletes make up 1% of the applicants and 10% of the admitted students. And this is, replicated at, the smaller Division III colleges among the NESCAC schools, for example. It can happen for your child if you, start them very young and beat them over the head and, give up your life, give up your summers, weekends. But I would challenge the logic of that and the cost of that. Mm-hmm. First of all, because if your child doesn't really like it, you're going to be at war the whole time. And they probably won't get there. And what is the cost of that to your marriage, if you're married, to your other children, to the household, to other opportunities that can be just as valid? I mean, I think it's elevating the importance of college grossly out of proportion to the actual value of it. The name brand college, suppose it gets your child in a school that's 10 notches up on the U.S. News and World Report ranking. Is it worth this many years of sacrifice and effort and struggle that the child may not even want, may be interested in pursuing? I would question that and think twice about that.
Well, in some colleges, like here, we're close to Stanford. When my daughter was there, she's not an athlete. But I remember her telling me that roughly a third of the 8,000 undergraduates were athletes. Mm-hmm. If you think about very few of those kids are on scholarship, but they're all putting in all the effort, and it gives this sense of the student body that's really kind of warped.
Yes. Yes. Well, it's distorting. It changes the whole feel of the campus.
Yeah.
And by the way, those, Stanford athletes are really top notch, and Division I athletes, by and large, it's changed so much since certainly when I was growing up, playing in college, playing a college sport is so dramatically different. Now the number of hours kids put into their sport at Division I, the goal survey, which I would encourage anyone who has a child who's looking into this, who's considering playing college, or maybe you're considering it for your kid, look up the NCAA goals, GOALS survey, because it's really a wonderful resource on figuring out what are the college kids saying about the experience. And I'm not saying it's all bad by any stretch. A lot of it's good for many of them. They have a wonderful experience. They also all say that it's a job, and that the amount of time they put into it, the Division I level, on average 33 hours a week on their athletics, 35 hours a week on academics. And they get on average 6 hours and 15 minutes a night of sleep. And look, that's heroic. I mean, if you can do that and manage, more power to you. I think there are many kids for whom that would be very, very difficult.
Mm-hmm.
And when you consider, okay, what are the trade-offs here? Why are we doing this? Where is this going to end up? For some kids, it might make more sense to, study abroad, major in something that doesn't interfere with the athletic schedule, because there's a lot of competition with classwork and sports too.
Well, out here, we just watched the Pac-12 dissolve. Our West Coast athletes, in addition to everything else, are going to be flying across the country for games.
I know. Well, that just shows you what the priorities are. It is not the interest of the kids. I mean, I call them kids. They're college kids. They're young adults.
Yeah.
Flying across country to run a race or play a volleyball tournament and then head back. And this is just, it's not sustainable for these kids. And I have great sympathy for them and respect for them, because it's unbelievably difficult. And I think that, the dissolution of the Pac-12 is the perfect example of how kind of warped college sports have become.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Absolutely. So, Linda, this is one that, brought me again back to lots of memories. As you say, kids' sports, or having an athletically talented child, can bring the promise of social status. What do you say to parents who may have personal investment in their kids' athletic performance? I remember that feeling.
Yes. Well, I think I first want to say that I felt that. I had one child who was, of my three, one was a good athlete. The other two weren't, and that's fine. They don't care. And I didn't either. But I felt such pride, and he was like, and I talk about this in my book, like he was like the little, the star on the basketball court at age 9. And I could, walk and look at me, my little kid's so good. And it just felt so gratifying.
Yeah.
And I felt so proud. And I want to say, there's no shame in being proud of your kids. I don't want to suggest that, because there's enough heartache with having kids. We can at least feel good about it from time to time when there's this like nice thing they do. I guess what I would encourage parents is to demonstrate some metacognition and like recognize that, okay, I feel like, what's going on here? I feel like weirdly overjoyed, or on the other hand, like strangely depressed and sad about the fact that my 10-year-old didn't score a goal. Okay. I think when you can kind of step back and recognize that that's not healthy, that you're probably a little too invested, that it would be psychologically invested in their well-being, or I'm sorry, in their sports performance, and that it might make sense for you to kind of step back a little bit. Because, one thing one of the giant sort of overarching issues with youth sports is that we've forgotten who they're for. Youth sports are for kids, but the adults have kind of come in and hijacked that. And I'm not saying it's out of bad intentions. I think parents love their kids and they want to do well by their kids, but they've kind of hijacked it so that it's become more about coaches' needs, parents' needs, and that's not into kids' advantage. It's better when it comes from them.
Oh, my son was about 10 and he was the soccer goalie. And I remember he missed the goal in a sudden death shootout. He was like 10. And the parents all turned on us. And
Oh my God.
it cannot be worth it, folks. It can't be worth it, right?
No, I mean, you have to on some level recognize that that's ludicrous.
Yeah.
It's truly ludicrous, but it's so normalized that, it seems like socially acceptable to scowl at the parents whose child made a mistake. It's ludicrous. And we kind of have to recognize that, okay, we're a little too involved.
Yeah, Linda, I want you to talk, if you would, for a minute about your really important part of your book on the inequality, income, racial, ethnic, all of it that's in youth sports. I mean, I remember I was a single mom when my kids were most competitive, where when we had to provide dinner, I couldn't really afford to be bringing pizzas for 25 kids.
Yes.
But as you say, we're taking away opportunities from low-income kids.
Yeah.
We don't really have the diversity that we had.
Yeah.
Do you have any suggestions around that?
I know, well, that is a really tough one, and most of the talks I've done, and it's not surprising, are in, well-to-do communities where the issue is not lack of access, it's too much, and which I said, it's the feast or famine situation. And I think kids are really losing. It's not just the low income kids, although it's completely class-based. For example, CDC reported, I think it was 2020, that in households earning $100,000 or more, 70% of kids play sports. In households 25,000 or less, 30% of kids play sports. I mean, it's pervasive. So if you think sports, that exercise and movement, and it's funny that how the more we know about how sports help you develop, help your brain, help your mind, help your emotions, the more critical it is that everyone be able to play them, that everyone have access and have some opportunity. And yet this is one of those unintended consequences of privatization of sports. And I know there are well-intended people trying to fix it. There are people in private, private clubs and organizations. They're not trying to exclude everybody, but that's kind of the effect when it costs too much and when the time demands are too great. I don't know what the answer is to this, short of some kind of regulation. Or, I mean, one answer is schools stepping up and providing more. We expect so much of schools as it is, but I think one of the answers to the problem with the lack of access is doing more in phys ed, getting more movement during the day. Schools that have done away with recess, shame on you. Kids need to be moving around all the time.
Taking away recess as a punishment, that kills me.
It's just completely insane.
Yeah.
And in high schools, like big high schools, if you're a basketball player, how many kids are on the team? 5 starters. Okay. So tons of kids play basketball, but if you go to a big school, the chance of making the team is very slim. It would be wonderful if schools could find a way to offer more intramurals and club teams so that the kids who, maybe they're not the best one on the team, maybe they got cut, maybe they got put on the C team and they quit, that they have opportunities to play. It doesn't have to just be varsity sports or nothing. So that in those low income schools where they might not have, they can't do the pay to play stuff, they can at least participate in school.
That's such a good point, Linda. And I think here in our community, one thing that I really like that the high schools did is they instituted a couple of teams being no cut. The track and the running teams were no cut. The tennis team was no cut. So at least you could get more kids out on the field and they can participate, right? Because I think that's important.
Well, and you're going to get pushback from coaches on that because, the more kids you have, the harder it is to coach,
right.
and you want the best coaches, want the best kids. And, so there's this balancing act, and, schools have to have understand what their purpose is. You know, if schools really embrace the idea that, you know, they're interscholastic, they're supposed to be for the education of the kids. It's not in order to, you know, send them off to play in college. That's not the purpose. The purpose is to help kids grow and learn, develop, become leaders, develop some understanding of themselves. Then that would go a long way towards helping more kids.
Absolutely. And just back on the recess thing for 1 minute, I talked to someone in Palo Alto recently, and they have renamed recess Brain Break.
Oh, interesting.
I can say that because I'm a Palo Alto native, and it makes me insane. Okay, here's a question from our audience. Is there one sport doing this better than others? We know it's not soccer. I think we're talking about.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I would say there's some sports that don't have the pay to play model, that don't abide by that, and where there's no penalty for starting later. And that's sports like, okay, I am biased, but running, for example, any kid can run. Any kid can start as a freshman in high school and become a varsity runner if they have talent and they have a decent coach.
Mm-hmm.
You know, again, I am biased, but there aren't barriers to entry in track and field. You know, unfortunately, like the mainstream sports like basketball, volleyball, soccer, they have this pay to play model that is, and there's this pressure to start at younger and younger ages. I mean, I wish I had a better answer than that.
No, I mean, it's our friend, Dr. Steve Smith, who is a clinical psychologist at UC Santa Barbara and also a lifelong athlete, likes to say specialization is for insects, not children. Right. Because he interfaces with the coaches who are seeing massive amounts of mental health problems in those athletes.
Yeah.
And, you know, I hate to say it, Linda, just to be serious for a minute, we've had too many tragedies with suicides of high-level college athletes. One here recently at Stanford. I mean, there has to be a better way.
Yeah, absolutely. You know, and the irony or the paradox is that sports and movement are so good for your mental health. They're so good for your brain functioning. Like, we shouldn't be warping them into something that's just one more thing that's a source of anxiety. They should be helping everyone feel better and to move forward in life and can be able to handle things better, not just one more obstacle.
But especially, as you say, at the college level, it's a job. So those kids need more support. They need, you know, when you see those kids spiking into swim at 6 a.m., that's a long day.
Yes, it really is. I mean, it's unbelievable how much goes into it. And it is night and day from when I was in college. I ran in college. I hadn't even run in high school for a team, but I ran in college because I had some talent and I could. Night and day.
Yeah.
You know, there's no way you could do that now.
Yeah. So, Linda, here's another quote of yours. I love this. You say, forget the pageantry. Kids need something much simpler. What do you say that is?
I think they need most of all to be able to run around and be with friends outside, to be it's not about the uniforms and the rules and the schedules. You know, this is what adults like. We like to schedule things and it helps our lives. You know, if we have a time for the game and it's such and such time and it's going to end in a given amount of time, kids, you know, that's not what sports are about. It should be, ideally they would be out there on their own, figuring it out. Go out and, you know, play wiffle ball in the park or something where they're playing and figuring the game out without adult hovering. Our presence does not help, especially when they're really young. I understand for safety purposes, somebody needs to be around, but for the most part, what they need is to be with other kids their own age, to play together, to run around together, not have their phones. God forbid they have their phones, to just be together face to face. This, you know, this is one of the great things about sports and athletics. You know, it's not about technology. It's not about looking at a screen and being together. Kids really need that.
Yeah, they really do. I grew up in South Palo Alto. There were 99 children on our street. It had
Wow. Wow.
the day when everybody had 4 to 8 kids, but it was such a fantastic way to grow up because
Yes.
biking and roller skating and whatever, right?
Yes.
I know we can
Yes.
replicate that, but I think your point is well taken. Yeah.
Well, and you know, I've heard from many parents when they'll say, but that's not the way it is now. What are we supposed to do? Everyone's off at, you know, there's soccer practice, so there's no kids left around. I understand that. And I think the answer is, I mean, it takes some work on the part of the parents to David Brooks has a term for this. He calls it the brutality cascade, when the most brutal player sets the terms for the game and everyone else feels like they have to follow it. So what he suggests, and what parents in these, you know, they don't want to do this stuff, but everybody else is doing it. Well, you have to like find what he calls friendship circles, find other people who like, okay, let's make it a deal here after school. I'm in charge Monday. We'll get the kids together in the park. I'll be there. These are what we're not going to do. We're going to hold the line. We're not going to do Sunday evening games. We're going to be home Friday if we're going to have dinners as a family on Friday. Like, you set the norms, the rules for that you can all agree to, and you abide by it collectively. And then if you can find other groups to adhere to those kinds of norms so that there are kids for your kids to play with. You don't need 50 kids. If you can find a few other families in the neighborhood or close by who would agree to say, okay, we're not doing this. We're not doing that. And we'll help let our kids play together and encourage that kind of activity.
That's right. You can take a bag of balls over to the local school and just play.
Yes.
Let them play. All right. So, Linda, last question. After all these years of being involved in sports and coaching and watching and now writing this wonderful book, and parents, it's so readable. It's just full of stories, and it's a wonderful book.
Thank you.
What gives you hope when you think about what kids most need?
Well, let's see. What gives me hope? Well, I do think kids are pretty resilient. And I think that if we just give them the space and the time, they'll make the most of it. I think I'm optimistic that many parents and adults involved, you know, the grownups in the room, understand that this isn't great, that we have some issues here, and that we need to find a way to fix it. So that gives me hope that it's not just a lost cause. I do think the grownups want to see some changes. And as I said, like, I coach and I love teenagers. I think they're really underappreciated. They're so fresh. I fresh in a good way. Like, I love teenagers. And I think that if we can just get out of the way, they'll be fine. If we can, you know, like, remove the phones and get out of the way, they'll be okay. And I'm hopeful about them. I mean, you have to be hopeful, or where does that leave you if you're not?
Right, right. Well, you've given us really a lot of practical suggestions that totally make sense. And everybody who is with us tonight, you stuck with us. Obviously, this really mattered. That's Linda's point, is to try to get in front of as many people as she can and make a difference. So we hope you will pick up her book. And we really thank you for joining us tonight. But a special big thanks to you, Linda Flanagan, for a wonderful conversation.
Thank you. It's my pleasure.
Okay.
Well, it's really nice talking to all of you, even though I can't see any of you.
All right. Thank you, everybody. Take care. We hope to see you again soon. Good night.
Okay. Thank you.